I Saw the Fairies, Part 2. He was playing out in the park by the big kids' school. He had a big white ball that he loved to play with, loved to toss up into the air and try to catch, try to see how high he could toss it, try to see how many times in a row he could catch it. Whenever he threw it up too far, he would chase it down and grab it before throwing it up in the air again. It was a lot of fun. Some other kids were at the playground nearby, laughing and screaming, but Jason was so absorbed in his little game that he didn't realize it was taking him farther and farther away from everyone else. Mommy was busy. She'd found a friend of hers, ugly cootie bug Mindy Hammond's mommy, and was too busy talking to watch him. But Jason kept playing. He had wandered into the scary forest, still throwing the ball and trying to catch it, before he realized where he was and how far away he was from Mommy. The forest! Some of the grown-ups said there were monsters here, and that some people had D-I-E-D here. Now no longer caring about what happened to his favorite ball, Jason curled up against a big tree and cried. He didn't know what was going to happen to him now. Were the monsters going to eat him? Was he going to die here? Would the animals save him and take him in, like in the Jungle Book? Or was he just going to be so scared he would pee his pants and then everyone else would laugh at him? He hoped Mommy would find him soon. Jason was crying so much he had almost missed the sound of leaves rustling, branches snapping, someone coming. He looked up to see a tall, nice-looking lady kneeling down in front of him. She had long white hair, and she was wearing a long dress that looked like it was made out of a bazillion shiny beads. "Don't be afraid, little one," she said. She had found his ball. After a few moments, he took it and held it tight against his chest, never wanting to lose it ever again. Then, the lady stood up and said, "I'll help you find your way back." Not knowing what else to do, Jason trusted her, and he followed her to the edge of the forest, back to the park, where Mommy was calling for him. "Someday," he thought he heard the shiny lady say, as he ran off. When he ran back to her, Mommy wrapped him up in a big hug before asking where he had been. "I was in the woods," Jason said. "I got lost, but the shiny lady helped me." "What shiny lady?" his mother asked, frowning. Jason turned around and was about to point to where the shiny lady had been standing, but she was gone. Years passed. It was almost time for Jason to go to the big kids' school, what the grown-ups called middle school. He barely remembered that incident in preschool with the shiny lady, but he still thought it was worth investigating. No one he had told about the incident knew what he was talking about, or even believed him. They all thought he was just making it up, even when he was far too old to have imaginary friends. Maybe, if he saw her again, he'd be able to get some pictures or something, just to show people he wasn't lying. Jason couldn't explain why he couldn't just forget the whole incident after kindergarten. It probably had something to do with the fact that he had never seen anyone like her before, and he hadn't seen anyone like her since. Not to mention, he remembered her so vividly, even though he hadn't seen her for years. He could describe her face, her hair, her gown to the tiniest detail, and she just wouldn't leave his mind. There was some nagging part of his brain that told him she lived in the forest and never left there, so he would often go and investigate. He usually told Mom that he spent the time after school practicing basketball with his friends, just so she wouldn't be worried about him. Those rumors about people going into the forest and never coming out hadn't let up, and Mom would probably ground him if she found out he'd been hanging out there, just asking for trouble. However, Jason knew he wouldn't have anything to worry about. After all, these days, Mom was more worried about baby Bella, which left him free to do pretty much whatever he wanted, as long as he BS'd an excuse. He had heard one of the middle school kids say it, but he didn't know exactly what it meant. It was a plus to having a baby sister, he guessed. Today, like every other day after school, Jason walked along the faint path of the forest, his book bag lazily over his shoulder. He looked around for any sign of a shiny lady, but there was none. He decided to go deeper into the forest, wondering exactly how far he had wandered when he'd only been a little older than Bella. he reflected. Then he thought, when did a baby become a kid? 3? 4? He'd probably find out when he was older, when he was in middle school, or even high school. He'd probably been considered a kid back then, Jason concluded after a moment of thinking, since he had been in preschool at the time, and babies couldn't go to school of any kind. Bella wasn't in school yet, but Mom always said it was never too early to prepare. Jason looked around. How did he get here? He was lost. Again. He'd gotten lost many times before on investigations like this, and most of the time he never remembered anything other than going home later that night. He never knew if he had actually found the shiny lady, or if he just kept wandering around for hours and hours until he found his way out. Was the same thing going to happen here? Jason hoped not. He was going to try, no matter how hard it was, to remember this investigation, just so he knew it could be done. Nothing was going to make him forget this time. As soon as that thought occurred to him, Jason saw it. In a small glade off the path, a tall figure sat on a low tree branch, brushing her long white hair and singing in a language he couldn't understand. A closer look at her clothing and he knew. This was the shiny lady. She looked exactly as Jason remembered, but she was even more beautiful than he had ever imagined. He must have gotten too close, because the shiny lady heard his clumsy movements and looked in his direction. She jumped off the branch and landed effortlessly on the ground, before walking toward him as if her bare feet were on clouds. You came back to me, the shiny lady said, standing in front of him. She smiled. I never told you how much you've grown. You've grown quite a lot. If only... She cut herself off, clearly wanting to say more, but forcing herself to only smile apologetically at him. I'm sorry, my darling, she continued, gently placing her fingertips on his forehead. But you're not ready yet. Then, Jason was back at the edge of the forest, as if he'd never explored it in the first place. The sun was about to set, so he headed straight home, hoping Mom wouldn't ask too many questions. He had forgotten. That couldn't have been you, or you couldn't be her, whatever. This doesn't make any sense. The shiny lady, she's not real. I was just seeing things, that's all. I was just a kid then. I made stuff up, big deal. How did you even... I've never seen you before in my life. I took away your memory of our encounters to protect you, the fairy explained, taking a few steps back so Jason could move. But you always managed to return. You finally gave up when you were 13. How do you know all this? I never told anyone that. Look, you're creeping me out, okay? I don't care who you are or what you are. Just, you saw them when you were little too? No, Jason replied, sharply turning to Pari. No, I didn't. Just one, the fairy corrected him. All he was allowed to see. Jason turned his attention back to the fairy. Look, you're not the shiny lady. The shiny lady's not real, okay? So stop trying to tell me she is. I've moved on. The fairy sighed. I was afraid this would happen. It's a common consequence of missing the coming of age. What are you talking about? Jason asked. You've become, for lack of a better term, too human. I don't know what you're talking about. I've always been human. This is what I'm talking about. You've become so rooted in your life that there's no room for change. So many human beliefs forced upon you, you forget who you really are, or... The fairy cut herself off and sighed. Or it's just me getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry for your confusion. Please, just give me one day, and you'll have all the answers you need. I'll even let you meet your real father. Please, give me this chance. You really want me to go with you? I promise, the fairy replied, almost in desperation, that nothing will happen to you. If you do get hurt, or if one of us hurts you in any way, you are no longer obligated to stay. You would be free to leave, and you would never see or hear from us again. Jason was about to accept, but there was still one nagging question in his mind. If I go, who's gonna take care of Pari? I want to go! Pari exclaimed right on cue. Please, Jason, let me go with you. I've always wanted to see their home. Please, Jason, please? Jason was about to say something, but he reluctantly glanced at the fairy. Your call. I will take care of her while you are making arrangements with your father, the fairy replied, a grin beginning to form on her face. I will protect her with my life. I see how much she means to you. So I can go? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you! Pari exclaimed, before tightly hugging the fairy's leg. The fairy chuckled uncomfortably as she shook the little girl off. She then proceeded to lead Jason and Pari to the forest, where hopefully all his questions would be answered. I barely remember this place. Jason was still trying to process the situation as anything but a weird dream, but he could hardly think with Pari's over-enthusiastic chittering beside him. She was going on about how she had always wanted to see the fairies, and which one in particular she was going to visit, and which one were her friends, and which one she wanted to avoid, and what she was going to do while she was there, and so on ad nauseum. Most of your memory of this place was erased a long time ago, the fairy explained. Somehow, though, you still kept coming back. Please be quiet, she interrupted herself, turning to Pari, who shut up immediately. I had wanted to interpret that as curiosity, as a desire to find something the humans said wasn't there. I had wanted to know that it was your heart that was leading you back to me. Heart. Yeah, something like that. The fairy chuckled. I'm not upset. What did you say? You, moved on. Yeah. Oh, in all that excitement, the fairy added, I forgot to introduce myself properly. My name is Ortho. I am a messenger. I figured, after a while, you would want to stop calling me the shiny lady. You are an adult now, after all. Ortho, that's, a different name. Well, I could say the same about yours, Jason, Ortho retorted, before adding, I know all of this is still very strange to you, and should you choose to stay, it'll take a while for you to adjust. After you meet the soldiers, though, everything will start to make more sense. As they walked through the forest, their path became illuminated with scattered will-o-wisps and what looked like large fireflies. Pari was ecstatic. Jason was confused. Are these the, soldiers? Ortho chuckled nervously and shook her head. Goodness, no. You underestimate Gregor. He would never let the sprites be part of his army. They are too weak, he says, like bugs. Jason frowned. Gregor? Who's that? He is the ruler of our land, Ortho replied. He only allows the strongest and purest to be in his very presence, let alone his army. Those he only turns away are the lucky ones. Jason did not want to know what that meant. Sounds like a nice guy. Ortho whispered in Jason's ear. He and his soldiers are not what the humans would imagine the Fae to be. They are not what they would want to imagine the Fae to be. Gregor is nothing less than a tyrant, murderer. I would rather not have Pari meet him. It is for your own good. She spoke up again. No one has complained about him and his leadership. Our territory has been well protected for the past 200 years because of him. He must be really powerful, Pari observed. Yes, Ortho replied. He is. Soon they were standing in front of the entrance to a large underground cavern, barely lit by a path of pulsating wisps and flickering lanterns. This is where Gregor lives, Ortho said. He is expecting you. I will take Pari to my home where she will be safe. The messengers and sprites will protect her while I wait for you to return." "Wait," Jason said. "You mean Gregor, the—" When Ortho hushed him, Jason immediately got the message. "The ruler of your land, he wants to see me?" "Yes," Ortho replied hurriedly. "He has heard all about you. He will help to teach you the ways of our people, and after that you will be reunited with your father. Now go. He does not like to be kept waiting. He probably already knows you're here." Startled, Jason made his way down into the cavern, not knowing what to expect from the ruler of their land, Gregor. He followed the flickering path farther and farther away from the moonlight of the surface world. There were not flames inside the hanging lanterns, Jason discovered when he decided to stop and look closely at one of them. Instead, there were tiny sprites like the ones he had seen outside, furiously and desperately flickering as they struggled to escape their glass prisons. There were usually 5 or 6 in each lantern. However, in the dimmer lanterns, only 3 or 4, sometimes even fewer, were still buzzing around, still trying fruitlessly to escape. The rest were dead. Limp, human-like corpses, each barely the size of his index finger, lay in a heap at the bottom of each lantern. Jason had even witnessed one of the sprites flicker out and die. The poor creature had used every ounce of its remaining energy in a futile attempt to break the glass wall, but its firefly-like glow had extinguished for good, and the sprite's corpse slid limply down the side of the wall to the edge of the pile, where it lay, unmoving. Jason managed to tear his eyes away from the lantern. What did he care? What happened to them was none of his business. But the fact that Gregor seemed to have captured them just for the sake of using them as light sources, and then leaving them to die. No, they were just bug-like things, like fireflies. Really big fireflies. Human-shaped fireflies. Kids did this stuff to fireflies all the time. It was really nothing to worry about. "If they look like bugs," a voice inside his head told him, "they should be treated like bugs." Then again, a few will-o-wisps met him and guided him the rest of the way through the labyrinth, although they didn't make the journey any less ominous. Eventually, the wisps dispersed into a colossal chamber, the heart of the cave. Jason saw a swarm of them hypnotically hover above a massive lake, giving the illusion that its surface sparkled and reflected the moon and stars that weren't there. The wisps illuminated the entire chamber, although it couldn't offset the sense of foreboding that had stayed with him throughout his whole journey. On the lake were 2 rows of islands, and a long bridge that cut between them, an isle. The islands closest to him were only small hills, but as the isles stretched farther away, the islands began to turn into mountains themselves, although none of them could compare to their Everest at the heart of the lake, where Jason assumed Gregor lived. On each island stood a man about as tall as Ortho, wearing thick brown armor with black padding. These men must have been the soldiers Ortho was talking about. They were nothing like he had imagined them to be. They weren't fairies. They didn't even have wings. Then again, neither did Ortho at first, but it was clear that these guys didn't tote around friggin' tutus and magic wands. Before Jason could get a good look at anything else, the swing of a sword and the roaring pain in his arm caused him to cry out and fall against one of the smaller islands. It was then that he noticed what the islands were actually made of. Jason's body was forced against a prickly pile of bones that dug into his back like cacti. He saw a golden glimmer out of the corner of his eye, and hoping for a distraction from the pain in both his back and his arm, which he knew was bleeding, bad, turned his head to look at it. There was a pair of brown booted feet directly in front of his face. Startled, Jason turned his head again and immediately noticed the tip of a sword pointed at the base of his neck. It belonged to one of the soldiers, presumably the one who had attacked him in the first place, who loomed over him with a stoic brown and black painted face and a vengeful fire in his eyes. "What is your business here, human?" the soldier above him asked, the sword at Jason's neck hardly wavering. Jason was too petrified to respond. "How did you find this place?" the second soldier clarified, the booted feet by Jason's face hardly shifting as he also unsheathed his weapon and pointed it at the base of Jason's neck. When Jason looked up at him, he looked nearly identical to the first soldier. "Speak, and you will have ample time to prepare your last words." It was then that Jason found his voice. "Grigor! I'm here to see Grigor. Ortho sent me. She says that Grigor can help me find my father. Apparently, she says I'm a changeling or something. My name is Jason. Jason Vega. Or I don't know what you would call me, what name you would have for me, what name I'd be under." Now it was the soldiers' turn to be petrified. In one swift movement, they both lowered their weapons and turned to each other, quietly discussing something. Jason took the opportunity to shuffle to his feet, knocking some of the bones into the shallower part of the lake. His back ached, and his now completely red forearm stung horribly. He just wanted some freaking answers. Finally, the soldiers turned back to Jason. "My apologies. We didn't recognize you." "This way," the first soldier replied, before walking stiffly to the bridge and toward the mountain in the center of the lake. Jason could barely process the soldier's comment. They didn't recognize him? What did that mean? Whoever he was supposed to be here, was he really important enough to have to be recognized by the soldiers? There was only one way to find out. The second soldier stayed behind on his island and glanced curiously at Jason as he dizzily sloshed through the shallow water and caught up to his guide. All of the islands were made of bones and gold shards, Jason realized. Even the mountain in the center of the lake, their destination. But where did Grigor get all those bones and all that gold? His stomach sank as he thought of an answer to the former question, thinking back to the sprites in the lanterns. As they ascended the mountain, Jason tried to keep his balance so he wouldn't fall onto the bones again. They crunched beneath Jason's and his guide's feet, and some even slid down to the mountain's base. But Jason managed to keep a good foothold for the most part, until they were close enough to see its sole occupant, Grigor, the feared leader of the fairies. That, Jason admitted, was a strange combination of words. Grigor made the other soldiers look like sprites in comparison. He was at least 8 feet tall and built like a lion, a giant frame, lean and protruding muscles, and a predator's eyes that would haunt Jason for the rest of his life. He had the same brown and black armor as the rest of his soldiers, but Grigor's armor had an additional layer of bones, most likely those of his once enemies. There was a human skull propped snugly on each shoulder and rib cages of various sizes hugging his arms and legs. His breastplate was mostly composed of large leg and thigh bones threaded together. Nothing else, Jason realized, would have been formidable enough to support and protect the gargantuan man. Grigor, Jason's guide spoke up, bowing his head at his ruler's name. This human wishes to speak with you. He was brought by Ortho. He says he is Zelamir. At this, Grigor raised an eyebrow, and his gaze became more sympathetic, although not by much. Brought? Gregor had a thick, intimidating accent. Was it German? Russian? Schwarzenegger? Jason couldn't place it. Still, it was so thick that Jason could hardly make out the tyrant's words. From where? The soldier glanced at Jason, who took this as a cue to speak. Ortho, she came to my home and she told me the truth, sir. She told me you would be able to help me find my father. Your father, Gregor repeated, chuckling to himself. After a moment, he added to the soldier, Go, and reward Ortho. She will feast well tonight. The soldier bowed to Gregor, before turning around and walking partway down the mountain. However, instead of walking the rest of the way, he stopped, before a huge gust of wind erupted from the ground beneath him, similar to what had happened when Ortho had first revealed herself. However, the wings that burst from the soldier's back were not Ortho's graceful, hypnotic wings. Instead, these were massive, beetle-like wings that pounded at the rate of a jet engine as the soldier crouched low, preparing to take flight. He leaped into the air and shot through the cavern tunnels like a heat-seeking missile as the buzzing of his wings faded into the darkness. Jason had been knocked off his feet, but this time he had caught himself before the massive pile of bones could impale him and possibly drag him down the mountain. Once he caught his breath, Jason muttered, Damn, that was cool. I suppose, Gregor commented, having heard him. It is impressive for someone who has never seen real Fae before. Jason shakily stood up and faced Gregor. Real Fae? He asked. So are you, Jason stopped himself. As if reading his mind, Gregor narrowed his eyes and asked, what? You know, what did you say, Fae? Gregor frowned, and the distaste slowly spread across his face until he had the scowl and curled upper lip of a demonic bear. I knew what you were going to say, he rumbled, each word rising up from the deepest, darkest pits of hell. I've heard the human term, and it's likely the one you've heard too. It's derogatory, a slur, don't you think, now that you've seen what the forest dwellers, the Fae, really are? From now on, you will not say that word in my presence, or there will be grave consequences. Unless, of course, Gregor added, his tone noticeably lightening, you are using it to refer to the sprites and messengers? Yeah, that's what it mostly refers to. Yes, that word. The title, the word was more meant for them. Meant for creatures like them, their lack of strength and power. That is what that word is describing. Part of him still wasn't fully convinced that this is real, that he was just on some crazy LSD trip, but the only choice he had at the moment was to go with the flow, to hope he wouldn't screw up and make Gregor kill him on the spot. The fact that you agree, a jubilant smile spread across Gregor's face where hellish anger had been only moments earlier, only further proves that you are your father's child. Great, Jason replied, trying to decide whether Gregor's jovial mood was less or more unsettling. So, speaking of my dad, where is he? Is he, one of the soldiers or something? Suddenly, Gregor let out a booming laugh that nearly made half the islands crumble. Some of the wisps fled, but the soldiers standing on the islands were unfazed, bound to their duties. Dim-witted wench! Gregor exclaimed, roaring with laughter. Ortho knows full well who your father is, and she refused to say a thing. I will forgive her, though, because Zelamir has come home at last. Eh? Gregor cackled, wrapping a thick, muscular arm around Jason's body and holding him close to his side. He now understood what it felt like to be a paranoid kid's teddy bear. Do I have to do everything? Zelamir, you are not the son of one of my soldiers. You are the son of mine. You are of my blood, and the fact that you see the sprites and messengers as inferior creatures only proves it more. Okay, Jason gasped, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Things had just surpassed drug trip level of weird. I'm lost. You're my father? Yes, Gregor replied, releasing Jason so air could reach his lungs again. You see, many years ago, you were taken from me and sent to live with those animals you call humans. Not only that, but you missed your coming of age. I had tracked you down, pinpointed your location so that we could bring you home. But you were missing. At this, he narrowed his eyes. Yes, that was definitely vengeance. I was afraid I had lost you forever. But now you are home, and you will stay with us instead of going back to those animals, yes? You will take back your kingdom and your people. Before Jason had a chance to respond, Gregor continued. I thought so, my boy. It must have been as much a smear on your honor as it had been on mine. I can't imagine what it must have been like. Thinking about it sickens me. But rest assured, my son, I will find whoever was responsible for your disappearance, and they will pay dearly. Gregor noticed the bleeding wound on Jason's arm. You're hurt, the tyrant observed. I know this is from one of my soldiers. I should not blame them, though, and neither should you. He was doing his duty, and for him to have thought you were a trespasser, he was doing it well. As my heir, you will soon understand this better. However, for now you must be healed. Go back to Ortho, rest for the night, and return to me in the morning. Then I will teach you our ways.